Gaming with Passion. Today I have a very special guest, Thebarberwhogames. And so, first of all, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Bill, also known as the Barber Who Games on Instagram. I'm pretty much only on Instagram these days, so not too much hard to find me. I'm also the host, one of the co-hosts of the Gaming and Collecting podcast. The podcast is on all the major podcasting platforms. The most common place you can find it is on Apple Podcast or Spotify Podcast. And I blog about video games.
The topic of this episode is going to be us taking a look at the Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, which spans multiple consoles. The Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga started on the Game Boy Advance, which was released in 2003. There have been multiple sequels. There was Mario and Luigi Partners in Time, which was released on the Nintendo DS in 2005. There was Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, which was released in 2008 on the DS. And then the series started being released on the 3DS, where there was Mario and Luigi Dream Team, as well as Mario and Luigi Paper Jam. First, we're going to talk about our experiences with the series, and then we're going to go into whether or not we think there might be a new game in the franchise, and what we would want to see out of that game if it were to happen. First, let's start with you, Bill, on your introduction to the series.
A lot of people don't realize I'm actually a lot younger than people think when they first see me. I'm only 26 right now, so yeah. So I actually missed the first game in the series when it first came out, and my first actual experience was with the Partners in Time, the second game.
Do you have any specific memories from like when you got it or anything like that?
Do you remember the first like commercial for Superstar Saga? So this is back like before like the Wii era hit, and Nintendo actually like made like these really like bizarre like surreal commercials. And I remember the Superstar Saga commercial. It was like these two kids dressed up like Mario and Luigi, just like getting into trouble like in their backyard, and then it just all of a sudden like cut to like the game afterwards. It was like, what is this?
Actually, that sounds familiar now, because there were definitely game trailers that I had seen, but at that time I probably hadn't even ever played the game or even known what it was.
Yeah, same here with that, because I was only like 7 or 8 at that point, so I couldn't like afford to like. But I remember seeing it, and I knew what RPGs were because I played Final Fantasy VIII a lot at that point. Yeah, it was like I kind of would see it and I'd be like, that looks cool, I'd like to try that. I just never really got around to picking it up, and it was when the second one on the DS came out, and I was kind of like, I wanted that, like, I needed a DS game that would actually last a while, so I saw Partners in Time, and I was like, yeah, I'll go with that one. So I got that one for like Christmas, I think, the year it came out, and I think I didn't put it down for like, God, it had to have been at least a year. Like, I think I was on that one.
My introduction was, I didn't Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, but I remember, I don't think I've ever mentioned it on this channel before. I did Taekwondo from when I was probably like 3 or 4 years old up until throughout most of high school. So a lot of my memories and my friends were like, they also did karate or taekwondo. So I remember one time we were at like the dojo, and there was this kid, I think his name was Connor, and he had a Game Boy Advance. And I don't remember if I had a Game Boy Advance at this point. I don't think I did, or I might have just gotten one. And he was playing this game, and he's like, you gotta check out this Mario game. And I was like, what Mario game is on the Game Boy Advance? And so I looked at it, I saw him start playing it, and I was like, whoa, this is really, really cool. I think at that point I had played some RPGs. I had probably played Final Fantasy 7 and 8 as well by this point. Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga definitely like appealed to me right away, because I could tell that it was turn-based combat, but it was also Mario. Most of the games that are Mario that appeal to me happen to be RPGs. I'm not the biggest mainstream Mario fan, but I love Super Mario RPG. I love the Mario and Luigi series, and I like Paper Mario as well. So that's how I got introduced to the series. The next part will segment over to what attracted us to the series, and like what are the main points about Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga that make it interesting, and why we think that there should be a sequel even to the franchise.
Honestly, one of the biggest draws to like the Mario and Luigi series, I'd say, is the first thing that like really like stuck out to me, even with like Superstar Saga, the sprite work. Like, those sprites are like iconic these days. Like, I think like every like Newgrounds animation used those sprites for like everything back in the day.
Yeah, that's true.
Like you were saying, there really wasn't any original Mario games on the Game Boy, because everything was the Advanced series, which was just ports at that point.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was hinting at, because yeah, everything on the Game Boy Advance was just older games that they put on the Game Boy Advance, which was cool because for someone in my generation, I had never really experienced those games before. But this was a brand new entity. And I think what I like about this franchise is number one, obviously it gets to draw from the plethora of Mario characters, but there's something really unique about the style. Like you said, the actual animations, all the characters, there's so much wackiness going on. The villain designs are like really interesting and just
Oh
like
yeah, definitely.
over the top cartoony. So that's definitely a huge drawing factor for me.
That and the writing, like the writing in Superstar Saga is like it's something else. Like it's I don't know what it is about the way like Alpha Dream like writes their characters, but every one of them has like more personality than they need, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, like at least for me, again, I think I had played Superstar Saga when I was much younger, around the time it came out, maybe a few years after. I think my brother borrowed it from his friend Corey or something, and we held on to it for probably years. And I do remember getting stuck at different parts. Like, I feel like every kid can relate to the like playing an RPG for like a year when you're a kid and then getting stuck on a place.
Oh yeah.
And then like 2 years later, you just randomly pop it in again and you're able to beat it, and then you can progress and like stuff like that.
Like trust me, my first RPG of all time was Final Fantasy VIII, and I always joke saying Final Fantasy VIII is like the worst place to start for like any kid getting into RPGs.
Yeah, if you want to talk about like the most convoluted, broken battle system, but as a kid you cannot figure anything out. Yeah, that's it
No,
for you.
like the entire game is counterintuitive, basically.
I guess so the primary games that I had played was the original, which I think I might have gotten to the final boss, but I really don't remember 100%. I need to go back and complete it at some point. And I know you played Partners in Time, so I guess like was there anything like, even for me, I guess, since I've never played it, what do you think is the main selling point of Partners in Time for somebody who's either played earlier games in the series or just wants to jump in somewhere in the series?
That's the funny part about Partners in Time. It's not really a secret that Partners in Time is considered the black sheep of the franchise. It's so hard to explain because I have massive nostalgia for the game because it was like the one that like got me into it. But I've seen online like some people absolutely can't stand Partners in Time for whatever reason. Going from Partners in Time to Superstar Saga is, it's odd because it doesn't actually feel like a step back. It actually kind of feels like a step forward. It's really bizarre. Superstar Saga had this like massive like open like world that was like incredibly fun to explore. You had like all sorts of different like tiers of like upgrades and like power-ups you could get, really complex like special moves and stuff, and then you get to Partners in Time and it's incredibly linear, not in a bad way. It's just like your goal is always in front of you and you really only have one way you can go. They kind of simplified all the mechanics and then they expanded other ones. It's weird. Then it's also really dark, like like tonally and like story-wise for a Mario game.
I know also it does utilize obviously the dual screen a little bit. Do you think that was a hindrance of, how like a lot of the earlier DS games kind of tried really hard to use the second screen even if they didn't really have to?
So actually, Partners in Time, in my opinion, aside from the touchscreen basically being ignored the entire game except for one moment in the middle of nowhere where you have to like rub dirt off a paper at the end of the game that comes completely out of nowhere and it never gets brought up again. Aside from like the touchscreen being underused, the DS, actually I think Partners in Time makes really good use of the two screens, because for most of the game, one screen is just always used as like a map, which is like one of the best things the DS did. In combat, because Partners in Time had like items for special moves rather than like the weird like Street Fighter combo like moves from Superstar Saga, a lot of them had like visual cues where like things would go up onto the upper screen and you'd have to like watch to see like where the like where the attack was either going to hit you or like where like one of the brothers was going to land. And it was kind of, it was cool because it, like, as a kid I didn't really pay attention to it, and I was always wondering like why am I always getting hit, why can't I figure out the pattern. And then it kind of clicks and you're like, oh, you gotta watch what's going on up there to figure it out. It was pretty cool because the whole gimmick with Partners in Time is you have both the Mario brothers and then their younger selves, the baby versions. There's a lot of like puzzle solving throughout the game where you have to like separate the brothers, and like a lot of times when younger ones go like off screen, it'll go to like a different screen. And there's some puzzles where you have to do one thing on with the older brothers, and then you go with the babies on another screen, and you have to kind of time it out watching the two screens. It's actually really well done. Now that you actually make me think about it, I'm like, yeah, that game actually did a really good job with the two screens now that I think about it.
Yeah, like there were definitely games that did it wrong. So that's good to hear. I mean, I like also with this series that like it reminded me because you were talking about the puzzling sections. Like at least I know with Bowser's Inside Story as well, where it's not just a straight JRPG. There's obviously some puzzles and some different things you have to do, which it seems like in this day and age is kind of mandatory. You don't really find a traditional JRPG anymore that doesn't have some kind of extra thing on the side because most people don't like the extended grind. So I do have to give them some credit there because there were always really puzzles in some games can seem really tedious. At least I feel frustrated in some games when they make you stop playing and do a bunch of puzzles. But I never really felt that way with this series.
Trust me, one of my favorite games of all time is Tales of the Abyss on the PS2. But I swear, like half the puzzles in that game are like block pushing puzzles, and after a while, you're like, I just want to move on. But actually, now that you bring up a good point, one of my favorite things about like the Mario like RPGs in general was how like they're based off a platformer. So like you're always platforming. And one thing I always thought that was cool about the Mario and Luigi series in particular was how each brother was controlled by one button, so you had to kind of like time it out with stuff.
Right. It's like the callback to Super Mario RPG because
Here's a fun fact. I'm not sure if you know this or not. The director for the Mario and Luigi series was actually a former Square employee that worked on Mario RPG.
that makes a lot of sense to me because I mean it's very clear that there's a lot of inspiration from that series or from that game.
I think both like Mario RPG series were definitely inspired. Well, because Paper Mario was originally supposed to be Mario RPG 2 before like they had issues with Square.
I was just gonna say it is interesting because yeah, think about it. So Mario has essentially two different RPG lines, right? If you consider like Superstar Saga and Paper Mario, and both kind of trailed off a little bit, but they were both inspired by Super Mario RPG. So they have some things that are very similar in them,
Both have like an emphasis on platforming,
and the button pressing for attacks and things like that and blocking.
and Mario and Luigi just took it to its like logical extreme compared to the more simplistic approach with Paper Mario. And two completely different developers too, which I always found was like pretty interesting.
Super Mario RPG is a very influential game. I mean, I don't really know what else to say.
I think the biggest problem is that game is in like legal limbo, and they kind of can't do anything beyond just re-release it, unfortunately. And I know everybody wants a true sequel to it, but it's just, even though Square and Nintendo are like friends again, it's kind of just like one of those things that's probably never going to happen. I mean, you never know. Stranger things have happened these days, but
All right, so let's get into Bowser's Inside Story. So for me, this is the game why I enjoy the series. I think I played it later. Like I don't think I got it when it came out.
I bought it day one because I was so obsessed with Partners in Time. I was like, ooh, they're making a sequel, okay. And I kind of just I jumped on it the second I saw it.
Here I am like watching footage of it before this to like remember the game, and I'm like, this game is amazing. You know, we touched on it before, but it's just a really funny game. The story is like, it's interesting enough, but the writing is so good. Like I don't know. And the characters are like all have so much personality. You just like love every character.
Well, interestingly, jumping back to Superstar Saga real quick, one thing from that game that I've always said, because it kind of ties into Bowser's Inside Story later, Fawful is one of the most underrated video game villains of all time, because he is like just insane. But it's like, he's insane, but he's also like foreshadowy, which is like, because his whole entire plan, like in Bowser's Inside Story, is like foreshadowed from the beginning. Like if you look at like the context clues and stuff.
Yeah, that again, that's good writing in my opinion. That's like, you know, we're gonna give the fans that are really paying attention, you know, a little bit of a teaser or an Easter egg of what's gonna happen. Because I mean, again, these games are aimed at kids, and remember when you're a kid and you're playing, like everyone's different, but I remember a lot of games I couldn't even like read. There's always a little bit more for people that are paying attention to the game.
As someone who has been playing RPG since they were 3 years old and not being able to read much, it changes a lot when you get older and you go back. It's like, oh, that's what that meant. And then the inside jokes and stuff pop in, and then you just get older and you're like, oh, Okay, I get what they're doing here.
Yeah, you're like, oh, that one was for the older audience for sure.
Well, actually, continuing on the Fawful thing, because he's such an important part of Bowser's Inside Story. So you haven't played Partners in Time, right?
No, I didn't play it.
Fawful has a cameo in Partners in Time, and it's like, because I played Partners in Time before I played Superstar Saga, it was one of the most confusing parts of that entire game. So in Partners in Time, Fawful actually runs like a bad shop, but it's hidden in the castle's sewers for some reason, like in the modern era. And the only way you find it is there's eventually at one point you unlock the basement of the castle once you get a certain power up, and the first time you go down there, you just see this random like red cloaked like figure walking around in the. It just shows like a little cutscene of him like walking off screen, and as a kid it scared the crap out of me because I was like, the hell is that? And then you go to the next screen and he's like in one of the pipes. And it's supposed to clue you in that you're supposed to go inside that pipe, but I didn't realize you could use the drill power up to go underground and then go into the pipe with the babies. So for a while I was stuck and I just kind of ignored it. I was like, that is the weirdest thing in the game. But then you eventually get in there and you find him and he's just like in this like sketchy shop underneath the building, and you basically you trade him beans basically for badges. All his like dialogue, because the brothers never actually interact with him, only the babies. And he doesn't recognize the babies other than
that's
that they
good.
look, and other than that they look vaguely familiar. So he goes on like a tirade about how like the brothers defeated him like by overheating his spaceship, and like how his boss battle went, and that he's foreshadowing the events of Bowser's Inside Story, but you don't really think anything of it. Because I didn't play Superstar Saga, I was like, this makes no sense at all, but it's bizarre, but it's kind of funny, like how they kind of just snuck him in there. I just want to know how he set up shop underneath Peach's castle the whole time, but
because he's plotting. I mean, what else is he gonna do, right?
True. They never do reference that though in the Bowser's Inside Story, so it's funny.
It's just a fun Easter egg. Like, they might not have even have planned on using him ever again, because Bowser's Inside Story came out a bit later. I mean, who knows at that time when they did Partners in Time if they even knew they were gonna make another game, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, just comparing the sprite work on Bowser's Inside Story from Partners in Time, it's like night and day. Like, you can tell how much more time and experience they had with the game at that point. Bowser's Inside Story, I think, is actually the best RPG on the DS. Actually, if not one of the best DS games, period.
See, this is why I wanted to have you on this podcast, because I feel pretty much the same. I didn't play... Like, I'm trying to think of total how many RPGs I've played on the DS and how many total games I've played on the DS, but it's definitely one of my favorites. I think it just caught me off guard. Like I said, I had played Superstar Saga and I enjoyed it, but by the time DS came out and there were there were all of these games on DS and there are a lot of good RPGs, right? So when I thought about it, I was like, okay, another Mario RPG. I was like, it'll probably be all right. And then I just couldn't put it down. Like, when I started playing it, I couldn't put it down until I beat it.
Honestly, I still to this day say the highlight of Bowser's Inside Story is Bowser himself.
Of course.
Like, it's honestly more of a Bowser game than it is a Mario and Luigi game when you actually like think about it.
Yeah, it is.
Because he's just so much more fun to play as than the brothers.
And it is his inside story, so it's getting his perspective and everything. So
that was a pretty cool. I actually did like how they incorporated that, like the inside Bowser parts were like a side scroller rather than like the 3D. Like, it was a good changing it up a little.
Yeah, exactly. Like, because if anyone knows Nintendo, and like especially with the Mario franchises, like, again, this wasn't developed by the same people as a lot of the other Mario games, but Mario games are known for just like adding on, and then eventually it becomes something else entirely, right? I feel like when I first would have started playing the game, I would have wanted it to be very similar to Superstar Saga, but then when I saw the changes that they actually made, I realized that it actually made it a lot more fun to play than the original, in my opinion.
That's actually one of the hardest things to go back to, like, original.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we'll get into it later with the remakes, but one of the hardest things about going back to like vanilla Superstar Saga is once you play Bowser's Inside Story and like all like the combo mechanics in battle, like the double attacking and like timing stuff, going back to original Superstar Saga is very difficult.
It's the natural progression of a game series, though, kind of, right?
In Partners in Time, they kind of started incorporating early ideas for that, because you know how in like Bowser's Inside Story, like, you get to do like the double jump if you time it right.
Right.
In Partners in Time, it works slightly different. Basically, once you the brothers and the babies finally like teamed up, you'd get like more of like a combo attack kind of thing where you control the brothers with A and B, and then you control the babies with like X and Y. So you'd kind of have to hit like X right before Mario would land on an enemy, so the baby would get a hit in, and then Mario would get a hit. So it was kind of like an extra step for something that they just simplified later to like perfection. But they were kind of incorporating those ideas like even earlier on than Bowser's Inside Story, which is kind of cool.
To me, it's just like they kind of tried a few things out in Partners in Time, and then by the time they got to Inside Story, they had kind of perfected the combat and everything.
The one thing that keeps always bringing me back to like I wish there was another like RPG series that did this, is just how if you were theoretically good enough, you'll never get hit once.
Yeah, think about that. That's crazy, right?
Like I've tried no damage runs of like Partners in Time, and it's hard. Like some of those attacks are like ridiculous, like to get the timing right.
Yeah, I guess you gotta have balance of like, I can imagine designing that would be difficult, right? Because it's like you don't want to make the blocks or the dodges so easy that everyone can do them, or else the game is not going to be hard at all, right? But then you don't want to make it too hard that no one can ever do them.
Exactly. And it's all about like context clues too. Like there's always like Fawful would always have like his like green speech or like red speech, like, and that's how you know where he's attacking, or like an enemy would like kick its foot right or left. You gotta just pay attention. Like that's basically like the key to it. The timing can be incredibly difficult sometimes though.
With the genre that is typically known for being boring or button mashy because all you have to do is click X and do the same attack over and over again, it's definitely a breath of fresh air into the genre when you have to actively be paying attention to play the game. I think that's why like these type of games really took off, I think.
I don't want to say they're easy like to pick up, because Superstar Saga is actually one of probably the hardest like Mario RPGs ever made when you actually think about it.
They're not that easy, but they're interesting, and you can get better at them after you play more and get used to the clues and everything.
Or you play RPGs like me and you just grind and get overpowered.
Yeah, I feel it.
For the lulz, I did an action replay. Like I was messing around with an action replay, and I just got maxed out everything in Partners in Time once, and it just completely changes how the game works. If you hack into the game and make yourself powerful enough, in Partners in Time, the first fight of the game is just a tutorial fight against Baby Bowser. If you actually raise all your stats so that you're more powerful and you kill him, it just breaks the game because the scripting doesn't know what to do.
Oh, that's interesting. I always wondered about that. I hate those fights that you're like guaranteed to lose,
or the ones that like you're guaranteed to win, but at the same time they have like dialogue and stuff that's like so scripted in that if you miss the dialogue, it just all of a sudden goes like the game doesn't know what to do, so it just kind of freezes until like you and forces you to restart it. Because I know the original Paper Mario had that problem too with certain fights.
Yeah, because I mean, it's just one of those things where if the game developers meant you to play it a certain way, then if you do it the wrong way, usually the game will just break because it doesn't know how to do it any other way.
It's kind of funny. I like messing around after I beat a game. I like messing around with action replay cheats just to see like what weird stuff you can find.
I never had action replay for that, so I never got to do that. Sounds fun though.
It's chaotic, that's for sure. Especially on the DS. I think the DS was like the one system where I actually like messed around with action replay the most. And actually like tried to write my own codes and failed miserably, but that's beside the point.
Because even some DS games are so boring that you probably gotta use action replay to make them fun.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like some of the licensed games and stuff that you just get bought for Christmas, and it's not a very good game, or you beat it in 30 minutes and you're like, oh.
Or sometimes you get that hidden gem though, because I still to this day, DS launch came out and I got Mario 64 and Herb Sims in the City, and I played more Herb Sims in the City than Mario 64. So it's funny because the DS is such a versatile system.
Yeah, it has everything on it, and obviously it has a lot of shovelware, but again, some of the shovelware is not actually really shovelware until you actually give it a shot and see that it's not.
It also has a lot of crap though, but what system doesn't at this point?
Is there a character that stands out for you from Bowser's Inside Story, or maybe just a part of the game, boss fight, or anything like that?
So I'm not going to go on for too long, but there is a lot of things in Bowser's Inside Story that make me just like love that game more than anything. The opening cutscene alone, I think it's called like the Blorbs or whatever, with like the toads just like exploding and like rolling through the houses. It's like that immediately is like, I was like, okay, I'm intrigued. There was that. There's the scene right at the beginning of the game where like the tutorial fight is where like the Mushroom Kingdom's having the meeting discussing what's going on, and then Bowser shows up and he's actually like, he's generally upset that he wasn't included in the meeting, and that's a really good scene because you actually kind of feel bad for him. Like
I think, yeah, that's kind of like the point of the game, I think, is to see it from Bowser's perspective, and you kind of You kind of like him a little bit after it.
RPG Bowser's always like the most likable Bowser's.
Yeah, agreed.
I think Bowser's inside story is tied with Super Paper Mario is probably the most fleshed out Bowser. Fawful is like probably one of my favorite RPG villains of all time. His like plan in this game is so ridiculous, but at the same time it works and it's cool. He's just like complete maniac though the entire game, and that's honestly probably why he's like such an effective villain, because he's like you wouldn't expect it.
Who's the I keep thinking of this character. Isn't there a character that's like a mystery block, or it's like a bunch of blocks put together?
He's like a French stereotype.
Yeah, he was like one of my favorite characters. I just like remember
I like that.
him.
Yeah, Brock Michaud or something like Michaud or something bizarre. And his dog. I love his dog.
Yeah, his dog is great.
My favorite part about his dog is when you show up when you visit his shop with the Mario Brothers and you go near the dog just gets angry as like can be, and like is just like growling in the corner. If you bring Bowser, the dog just kind of has like a pouty face in the corner and just kind of ignores you. He also had one of the most like biggest pain mini game side quests in the entire game, but that's another story.
That's another story for another podcast.
Oh, I like another cool guy is the guy on top of the mountain that you have to like body slam to get one of the pure miracle cures or whatever, because he's constantly like talking to Bowser like in his head, like through like those weird like warp panels, but then you actually meet him with the brothers later and you're like, oh, it's just this guy up on a hill doing nothing. I liked Fawful's little minion that he had. The like pig guy.
The pig guy. Love that guy.
I forget his name. I just like it because every time him and Bowser are on the screen together, it's just like a bro off, and it's like, okay, guys, we get the stereotype.
Bowser's personality is basically that he's a bro. Like,
pretty much.
He's just a meathead.
Ironically, one of my least favorite characters in the game, but also favorite for her effectiveness is Starlo. Just how she like just taunts Bowser from the inside all the time.
Yeah, she can get a little bit annoying, but yeah, I agree.
My biggest problem is like I get the whole like Luigi bashing, but at the same time it's like it's just unnecessary. Like at that point, like how much she hates Luigi for no reason.
Yeah, it's like, come on, Luigi's cool. Leave him alone.
Like, did you find the hidden like Shroob Easter egg boss? So like one of like the biggest like mini bosses. It's probably the most cryptic like Easter egg in that entire game. So you have to like do like this weird code in Bowser's castle to find it. But one of there's a secret mini boss which is 3 Shroobs, which were the main villain from Partners in Time, and they're actually really surprisingly difficult for what they are. When you defeat them, Starlo just like drops like this massive like dig at Luigi for no reason, where she basically just like claims like, oh, how did you beat them? By crying, which is technically how he actually did beat them in the game, because it turns out their weakness is baby tears for no reason.
Even secret bosses is like, although like it's, you know, it's fairly common in RPGs nowadays, but again, Super Mario RPG was notoriously known for its secret boss and stuff like that, so it's cool.
What's his name? Culex.
Yeah, just like the straight up Final Fantasy boss.
Yeah, the thing there was like, what Final Fantasy game is he from? It's like he's not, but he's based off a Final Fantasy character. I love that boss just because the Final Fantasy IV boss theme plays during it, honestly. So it's kind of on a meta standpoint, but one of the weirdest things about that Shroob boss is if you look in the background, Bowser has like all of these like Shroobs, including like the main like antagonist, like the big bad from Partners in Time, just frozen like in his basement. That's
cool though.
And I know it's just an Easter egg, but it's kind of like on a meta sense, like why does Bowser have these things like still? Like, I
don't know.
That's kind of dangerous.
Yeah, but I do love that in the series that they're always calling back on like the last one, like you said with Fawful and the second one, and then with the Rubes in the third one. It's really cool.
We kind of skipped over what'd you think of the giant Bowser fights?
I love creative boss fights. If you're playing an RPG, you've played plenty of RPGs that have a very difficult boss at the end that just will spam you with really broken attacks, right? It's like, give me a little bit something different where I have to think a little bit and I can't just power level and beat the game, right? I
like the idea behind them, but by like the 5th one, I was like, okay, I'm tired of these now.
I feel like I was too, because now hearing you say that, I was probably like, curse this.
Well, because by like the end, they just got so ridiculously repetitive, and like they got more drawn out and like longer as they went on, and I'm like, okay, enough. And it kind of got formulaic too, because it's always like Bowser gets crushed to death, time to bring him back to life and make him giant again.
Yeah, it was like a Power Rangers throwback when the little Power Ranger monster dies and they just make it giant size every time.
Although I did admit the train one was kind of clever, just getting like crushed by the train, and it's like, oh, it's like, I'm like, wow, that's dark for a Nintendo, and then it's like, You gotta bring him back. Honestly, one of my favorite parts of Bowser's Inside Story is like the mini games inside of Bowser that you do to like help him out in the real world.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the coolest parts to me as well, where again, just taking that RPG formula and giving a little bit of a different spin, but also relevant to the story because you're inside Bowser, so you got to mess with him a little bit.
Another cool thing too that a lot of people probably don't notice right away. There's like a bunch of enemies when you're playing as Bowser that are so tiny and insignificant that he just basically steps on them and they get.
Yeah, I love that actually. That's so cool.
But later in the game, when you finally get out of Bowser and you're back on the real world with the bros, if you actually run into those same enemies, you actually have to fight them now because they're like normal sized.
Yeah, I remember that. That again, that's such a cool, like simple thing that they put in, and it really does make it. I don't know. It gives it some charm. Like
it's cool because it's like, oh, okay, I get. It's like, oh, this is an actual enemy. It's not just a thing to give you a coin every time you step on it. Bowser's Inside Story is one of those games like where there's just like so many like little moments. Like I always remember too the when you finally get to Bowser's castle and Fawful turned it into a movie theater. You win that fight and then Bowser gets fat. It's because they need a way to unlock another area. And then you can if you ever want to go back to that area, you can just make him fat again for no reason.
That bothers me a little bit from like a canon standpoint, but you know what? We'll let it slide this time. How does that happen? But it's fine.
That's one of the more disturbing scenes in the entire game, to be perfectly honest. Like what's happening here? And then the treadmill later on, like just out of nowhere.
Yeah, you gotta lose that weight now.
Well, it's funny though because when you go back, he just does like sit-ups later, and it just goes away magically. And it's like, oh, I guess it works like that now.
Yeah, imagine thinking it works like that in real life.
I wish it did.
Just do like 3 sit-ups and you're good.
Yeah, it would save me a lot of time at the gym, that's for sure. Also, another thing, what do you think of? I guess this kind of goes for the entire series, but what are your thoughts on Yoko Shinomura's music?
I'm a sucker for good music in games, and I think that this again is one of the ones that stands out. I don't know what it is, but like it's definitely not 100% of the time. But when RPGs do have good music, it's just so much better because everybody knows the slogging through an annoying part where you need to level up a little bit more, and what helps you get through it? The sweet soundtrack.
Or the boss theme that like
yep.
just like gets stuck in your head. Or like Yoko Shinomura is probably one of my favorite composers. Like she's probably top 10, but I always love just every soundtrack she does just is like bouncy and like super upbeat, because she also did a Mario RPG too, the original one.
That's a good one too. That's one that would get stuck in my head.
Yeah, because there's actually one of the cool things is like the way they do the music in this game is when you're inside Bowser, it plays the same tracks from wherever you are on the overworld, but it's got like more of like a sort of like electronic sound to it.
That's interesting. I forgot about that, but that's really cool.
Because I have the soundtrack on one of my iPods, and I was listening to it, and it's like every song has like 2 different versions for like the inside Bowser and the outside Bowser like style, and it's interesting. It's cool.
I'm gonna have to listen to that on YouTube after this.
What's your thoughts on how every game seems to end with a Bowser fused with like whoever the big bad is, boss fight for no reason?
It doesn't bother me too much, honestly.
I just think it's funny. That's like the weirdest like running gag you could have, but it's clever how they've done it, at least for the first 3 games.
They love calling back to other things from previous games, and that's just one of them, right? So it's like, well, we've already done it this many times, better keep it going, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, admittedly Bowletta's one of the most disturbing things in all of Mario, but and then in Partners in Time is weird because the final boss of that game is literally like a cutscene dodging battle.
I'm not a huge fan of that, to be honest. But
nah, that one's just weird because it's kind of just like thrown in at the last minute, because the real final boss of that game is the Elder Princess Shroob, which is like a double boss fight that like you beat her first form and then she gets back even more powerful, and it's like I was stuck on that for years because her like attacks are ridiculous. But after you defeat her, everything gets cured, and then you're back in the modern era about to send the babies back, and then Bowser somehow fuses with her ghost and becomes Shrowser for some reason, and he's invincible. Like you can't attack him directly, so basically all you have to do is just dodge attacks until basically the meter he has like a health meter at the top, and basically he just dodges attacks until the meter goes down. It's an odd choice, I guess you could say, for a final boss.
It's odd, but again, I think it fits like the zaniness and the kind of atypical RPG formula that they have going in the series.
Yeah, because then in Bowser's Inside Story, the final boss is Dark Bowser, which is funny because you actually fight Dark Bowser as Bowser, which I always thought was a kind of cool.
Yeah, and it's like a throwback to, like, in my opinion, like Godzilla versus Mecha Godzilla kind of thing.
There's always an evil version of an evil
Yeah.
of an evil character, because of course there is. That boss fight is actually, I think, one of the best boss fights in the entire game. Now that I think about it, because you're fighting like your mirror, like a character that basically has all of your same like mechanics, but then you also have to like get Fawful out of him and like suck in Fawful using the wind power up thing that Bowser has, and then the bros have to fight Fawful from the inside so that you can face Dark Bowser from the out. It's kind of a cool like two-tiered boss fight.
Very meta, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy too because that's like the end of Fawful too.
You think, until we get the Switch version or the Switch entry. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, I'd be all for it. I miss that guy, but I guess before Dream Team though, I mean, was there like any other like key moments from?
See, it's for me, it's been a while, so I don't really have necessarily a key moment. What stands out to me is just the overall experience, doing things to Bowser when you're inside of him, some of those boss fights. So that's pretty much it for me. I don't have anything else specifically.
Honestly, that whole game is just like a highlight reel of like awesome moments. It's cool to look back at.
As you said earlier and I said earlier, I just remember at the time basically not playing anything else and just playing it to completion.
Back then too, like not when I didn't have a job or anything, I was just a kid. I mean, I said this on a podcast I was on a while back, but one of the reasons why I love RPGs so much is because I could only get like games once in a blue moon. I'd always get RPGs because they took forever and you'd have them for long periods of time. And I always remember it's kind of like that was one of the ones where I just was on it and played it till I was done, basically.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I always preferred getting RPGs because I knew that they would be longer. You know, you never wanted to get the like 30-minute licensed beat 'em up that you beat the first day you owned it, and then you're like, well, I guess I'm not getting anything for a year now.
You just gave me Dragon Ball GT transformation flashbacks. Hate that anime and that game so much.
Mine was like, there was like some like James Bond Game Boy Advance game. I didn't even really like James Bond, but it had like just come out. So I went to like Blockbuster or something and bought it, not even rented it, bought it, and beat it in 30 minutes. And then that was one of the only things I ever sold to GameStop. And because it was like the second day it came out, I got like $40 back for it or something. And I just bought something
really?
else. Yeah.
I mean, you made out there.
Yeah. It's like the only time I've ever beat a game in a day. It was crazy.
See, I never trade in games, so I have like all my licensed crap from like forever.
Yeah, I only have like 2 times in my life, and that was one of them.
Do you remember like the first like launch like announcement for Dream Team?
Not too much. I remember being like, okay, 3DS Mario and Luigi game.
It's people kind of forget about it now just because of how long ago it was now, which is actually kind of scary thinking about it. But that was a weird time for Mario RPGs because that was right after the Paper Mario Sticker Star like debacle happened. Because I remember everybody was freaking out thinking that Nintendo's going to do this to the Mario and Luigi series too. And I guess I've read, I don't 100% know the validity of these statements, but I've read that I guess they did try to implement similar things with Dream Team, but Alpha Dream I guess was just kind of like, no, we're going to make our own game. Leave us alone. Thank you.
That's good to know.
I think it might also have to do with the fact that Nintendo never owned Alpha Dream.
So they kind of just contracted the game out to them.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every game that Alpha Dream ever made was for Nintendo, but they were never like a first-party studio. They were more second-party. They probably were invested a little. It was probably kind of like the Rare situation, like back in the day, because Paper Mario is made by Intelligent Systems, and Nintendo 100% owns Intelligent Systems. They probably had no leeway there.
I'm sure they had something, but it was probably not enough to get them to really change the concept of the game.
Because I still remember the first reveal trailer for Sticker Star, and back when it was just Paper Mario 3DS, and it looked exactly like what everybody wanted, and then whatever happened that caused the change in direction happened, and then now it's considered the worst Mario RPG of all time. But anyways, getting back to Dream Team, the first Dream Team trailer was weird because it was right in the middle of. Do you remember the Year of Luigi?
Yeah.
Right in the middle of that. Honestly, it was the best game of the Year of Luigi. To be fair, too, the trailer was just Luigi sleeping. Like it was just the shot of him asleep. They showed that for like a few minutes, and then they showed like 3 seconds of gameplay showing off the graphics, and everyone was kind of like, "Is it 3D or is that just really really pretty 2D. I can't really tell. Like, I had no, like, they were just showing that scene of him sleeping there. I'm like, okay, is this just like a meta representation of what your Luigi ended up being? Just kind of like Nintendo hyped him up and did the bare minimum.
Yeah, did nothing with him.
Poor guy. Also didn't help too. That was during the Wii U era, but that's beside the point. So the first Dream Team trailer comes out. Everyone's kind of worried, like, oh no, they're gonna ruin this game too. Then we finally get the full-on like reveals, and everyone's like, oh no, it's they're just doing what they did before, only now it's super detailed graphics.
But what do you think about the switch from the really pixelated graphics to more 3D style?
I didn't mind it just because like if when you actually, a lot of people don't notice this at first, but if you look closely, the characters are still sprites. Like everything's still like a sprite. It's just kind of the world is now 3D like models. I actually think it's a really good art style, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is too is even 3DS. I mean, we're still working with how many polygons, so even if you make it 3D, it's like, okay, it's kind of 3D, but yeah.
I like the graphical look of it for the most part. I know some people hated it. Some people were more on like the middle ground, kind of. They weren't sure. I liked it just because I like evolution in games. I don't like them to stagnate, which is like, it's the same way I am with music. When the game finally came out, I remember I bought it day one because I had a job and money at that point. I played pretty much like it nonstop when it came out. Right away from like the start, the game is like one massive like fan service like shot. You've got all like the Bean Kingdom characters are like all over the place. You got like a bunch of like characters that you met like in Partners in Time doesn't really get any like real like love, but then again that game doesn't get love, period. So massive love letter to like the Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story. Like the question mark block guy, I forgot his name already. He's like your tour guide because the whole plot of the game is they're on vacation to like this like island that's like, it's like inhabited. It's like this island that was like once inhabited by like these like dream creatures. Basically, he's kind of like your tour guide. But the second you start actually playing is when it becomes very apparent one of Dream Team's biggest flaws, in my opinion, is Dream Team is like, compared to like Superstar, well, not really Superstar Saga, but compared to like Bowser's Inside Story and Partners in Time, this game holds your hand like nothing else in the first, like, it has a very slow beginning.
That's unfortunate because that usually loses out a lot of people.
That's honestly why it took me so long to finish it, because I'd play it for a while and then I'd kind of put it down and want to play something else. I played it when I was older and I had a lot more things I could also play at the time, so it didn't hold my attention the same way like Bowser's Inside Story did. That's a big problem. Another problem is I love the fan service, but also like at the same time it felt like they were pandering. I have no confirmation on this, but my theory is that they saw the negative reaction to Sticker Star and they just like went overboard to go the opposite direction.
Yeah, like let's give the fans everything they want. Let's give them all the characters they like.
Once you finally do start getting into the game, because the whole gimmick this time around is Luigi sleeps a lot. And basically, because you couldn't go inside Bowser, obviously, this time, because he's in the plot this time. But well, I don't want to spoil. Do you care about spoilers?
I would say let's try not to spoil it.
I won't spoil then the big reveal, but let's just say Bowser's involved in the plot. Like, he's definitely a villain again. He's not a hero as he was in Bowser's Inside Story. He also, a funny part is he also absolutely hates Starlo now, which is a good callback. Anyways, as I was saying before, because they can't do the whole inside Bowser like areas anymore. Their way to keep that style of gameplay is they instead incorporated Luigi's Dream Worlds, where one of the whole plots of the game is how the inhabitants of the island were basically all turned into magical pillows.
I was gonna say, wait a second, hold on.
The way that like you basically like restore like these characters back to life is Luigi sleeps on them and it opens up a portal into like this like dream dimension where Mario goes in. Basically you're inside Luigi's dreams, and it's weird because you're solo Mario whenever you're in there. Like, you have no Luigi. But the way they incorporate it is you get this, like, weird, like, celestial, like, dream Luigi that follows you around. So, like, when you're in battle, you have, like, these, like, weird, like, Luigi versions of your attacks where, like, Dream Luigi will, like, multiply into, like, thousands of them. And you'll do, like, a super jump attack where, like, you jump up in the air and then like 1,000 all the Luigis also fall down on the enemy. It's really cool. Like, it's a cool really like evolution of the combat. Dream Team's combat basically is just an evolution of everything that Bowser's Inside Story did, but more refined. It's kind of the same setup as Bowser's Inside Story. You do a dungeon in the dream world, then you do a dungeon on the real world. You find your like power-ups and stuff the same way. There's a bunch of mystery blocks and stuff. One cool thing is eventually you'll get back to like one of your like central hub towns, and then Popple, the Shadow Thief from Superstar Superstar Saga appears, and it's like, oh, it's him. We haven't seen him in a while, which was kind of cool. And he actually recruits Mario and Luigi as like his like rookie sidekick again. And then you have a boss fight with him, which is basically just one giant throwback. And then, unfortunately, then after that, he just completely goes away off of the story. You never see him again. He's very inconsequential to the entire thing. He's basically there for fan service too, which is another problem that I think the game has.
So it kind of sounds like Dream Team is almost like the most of a sequel to Bowser's Inside Story as there can be, since you still have that same kind of gameplay where you're going to Luigi's dream, which is similar to Inside Bowser. Am I mistaken in that, or do you think that
it's very much they took the ideas from that worked from Bowser's Inside Story and basically tried to like improve those? I think the problem is they tried to improve like too many things, because one of my biggest issues with Dream Team, it's not the gameplay, it's not like the world, like I'll say it right now, like Dream Team is not a bad game by any means. Like, it's actually a really well-made RPG. I think the biggest problem is, A, it had to follow Bowser's Inside Story, which is, to me, one of, like, the best RPGs ever made. There was like, so much, like, controversy going on with Nintendo at that point. It felt like they would always, like, shoot themselves in the foot, or, like, take one step forward, 3 steps back, if you know what I mean.
I also feel like, I don't know if it was the time, the other games that were coming out at the same time, but I remember hearing that the game was getting announced, and then by the time it came out, I didn't even remember anymore. And then like years later, I like saw it on a shelf and I was like, oh, this came out. So that's kind of my summary of Dream Team.
Well, actually, fun fact going back to that is that back when I pre-ordered games at GameStop, I actually went into the GameStop and pre-ordered it, and they were like, this is coming out like in 3 days, and I was like, oh,
cool.
I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna pay it off now then. I went and got it 3 days later. I was like, okay, that's cool.
Good timing on your part.
Yeah, it was funny. I was like, oh, I guess I could have waited a couple days, but whatever. I think one of the biggest things with Dream Team 2 that it makes it so forgettable to me is it doesn't have as good a story as Bowser's Inside Story. I think that's the biggest issue, because the game world itself is like perfect. It's like very well designed. The dungeons and puzzles are really cool. Like, everything makes sense. Like, it's just like Bowser's Inside Story, but looks nicer and is a bit more refined, but it doesn't have that plot that constantly like makes you want to like figure out what's going on. Like, it doesn't like draw you in like Bowser's Inside Story did, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and like with games that have a lot of fan service, it sounds to me like they were more drawing on the plot and players' experience by just showing them things that they knew already and be like, look at this, and meanwhile the actual story of the game is like whatever, but they're just trying to like fluff it up.
And like another thing too is like Dream Team also has a lot of moments that just feel like very long and drawn out too. Like one of my biggest things is like the boss fights. The boss fights are really cool and interesting, but they take forever.
What are we talking? How long?
Depending on how good you are at dodging the attacks, it's been a while, but I remember like 10 to 20 minutes sometimes on a boss.
Okay, wow.
A lot of it has to do with, it's not even like that the bosses are hard. It's so every boss, because obviously this also has a lot to do with the 3DS itself, because 3D, they want to show off those graphics. A lot of the bosses have like these very elaborate like attack phases, and some of them just take forever. Like there's like a lot of boss points where like you'll be running towards the screen and you'll have to dodge things that the boss throws at you, but they just go on, and you finish one, and it's like, good, you get in 2 attacks, and it's like, oh, we're gonna do that again. It's like, oh, okay.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting theory, too, because, like you said, it's like they wanted to show off the 3D capability, which so many people ended up using in the long term.
I'm holding my Nintendo 2DS right now.
Yep. I think I used the 3D like 3 times and realized it gave me a headache and never used it again.
I had an OG 3DS, like one of like the really tiny,
Same,
like
that's what I have.
Brick looking ones, and I turned the 3D on the first time, like, oh, that's cool, and then I was playing Sonic Generations of all things. I'm like, wow, this is completely just unnecessary, and I just turned it off.
Yeah.
Never used it again.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, it was a cool idea, Nintendo trying things, but at the same time it was kind of like, this is one of those things that I don't think you needed to try.
Let's sequence now to Mario and Luigi Paper Jam, which again, on paper sounds like the coolest idea ever, and mashing together 2 really good Mario RPG series. So how did it actually play?
So as of a game itself, it's a good game. No problems with it. Like it's that Mario and Luigi like trademark gameplay that you remember basically. Technically, like it's solid. No problems there. The problem with Paper Jam is, I guess it's just forgettable. That's really probably the biggest issue. Because I'm honestly having a hard time remembering what the plot was.
again, like similar to Dream Team, like this is saying here it came out around like 2015, 2016-ish, I guess. I don't remember what else I was playing, but I did not remember this game even coming out. Like, if I'm being completely honest, like I saw it on the list and I was like, what is this game?
I remember the trailers because I was big into YouTube at that, and I remember I watched a bunch of like commentary channels, and at the time I remember there was actually a lot of controversy with it because a lot of the Paper Mario fans were all like they were still very like upset about the state of their series at the time, and they were kind of mad that like they were taking it out on the Mario and Luigi series for like no reason, I think is the problem.
Yeah, instead of celebrating that they actually got a good Paper Mario game, which was actually a Mario Luigi game, they were just salty about it.
Yeah. That was, I think, the biggest problem. Because one thing I'll give Paper Jam, the writing is phenomenal. Like, you've got Paper Bowser talking with, like, Mario and Luigi series Bowser, and it's all just like ham. Like, they just ham it up the entire time. It's great. The characters all interacting with each other is really cool. I don't even remember if Paper Luigi's in the game now that I think about it.
Oh, no. Barely after Year of Luigi, and he just gets completely thrown out of the game.
You can't play as him, that's for sure. I don't even think he gets invited now that I think about it. So if you want to get really meta, if Paper Jam, if there's a greater Mario canon, which is a great,
I'm sure there's something.
Paper Jam's logic, the Paper Mario universe is literally a book on a shelf somewhere in the Mario and Luigi universe.
I like that.
Because the plot is the book gets knocked off the shelf and it somehow releases the characters into the Mario and Luigi world or something. I haven't played it in forever, so I might be wrong on this, but I think that's what the plot is. But basically, that's how they all end up in this world, and it's like, this is weird, but okay.
That's kind of awesome. I love that, actually.
It's just one of those meta things where it's like, when you think, it's one of those things where Nintendo's like, they're not going to think about this, but of course we are, because that's just what gamers do. Yeah, I remember that, and I remember combat was cool because they tried to, like, mix in elements of both series combat, because you had like 3 characters you controlled now on the field. Although Paper Mario was more of just kind of like a bonus add-on than an actual like party member, if that makes sense.
So that's what they did. They just had your Mario and Luigi, and then Paper Mario is kind of like an assist character almost.
From what I remember, like I think that's kind of what he did, because I don't think you controlled him directly like you did the brothers.
Okay.
And then it had like these like papercraft battles where like they were basically this game's version of the giant Bowser fights. Oh, actually, now that I think about it, I forgot to bring up the giant Dream Luigi fights in Dream Team, because those were a thing too.
Giant fights. I don't know why.
They just need like they need a moment to just inconvenience the player and have them turn the screen to like use the touchscreen. I guarantee those were added specifically because everybody complained that the touchscreen was so underused in Partners in Time.
I think it does, and I think that I have a theory like Nintendo at that point was like they had a quota where they're like, we need at least 10 games to use the touchscreen, or like whatever. They're like, this is a Mario game that doesn't use the touchscreen, like better throw something in there.
Well, it's actually funny because getting into like I'm a big fan of handheld gaming, but at the same time I get really annoyed when like they make you do something really outlandish while you're playing, because it kind of defeats the purpose of handheld gaming, in my opinion. Jumping ahead a little, I was playing the Bowser's Inside Story remake at the gym on one of the exercise bikes, and I'm getting to a boss fight and I forgot about the giant fights, so I'm like there, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, I have to change the screen, and I'm like on the bike trying to do this shit, and there's people
Somebody
just looking
walks
at me
in, they're like, who is this guy? Like, what is he doing?
They're like, what is he doing? I'm like, I was thinking about that now, because it's kind of like anytime that like the 3DS uses the gyroscope for anything, it's like, yeah, that's just what you need when you're playing handheld. Like, imagine playing on a bus with like the gyroscope. It's like, what do you think the people are thinking, like, just watching that? I don't remember the plot. Like, I don't even remember who the actually, I haven't finished it, so of course I don't know who the final boss is. One thing about Paper Jam that I do remember is there actually was a bit of a character embargo on this game, similar to like what's happening with Paper Mario right now.
So what did that mean for the game?
So there's not a lot of like the trademark like Alpha Dream original characters this time around.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
What makes up for it though is the dialogue and story and writing isn't like sacrificed at all, but at the same time they also made use of a lot of characters which at that point weren't super heavily overused. Well, actually, what am I saying? The characters I'm referring to actually are heavily overused by Nintendo, but I'm referring to the Kooplings, because they hadn't appeared in a Mario and Luigi game since Superstar Saga. where they were like mini bosses at the end. They appear in Paper Jam, and they actually all have like really interesting fleshed out characters, and their interactions with like Bowser Jr. is like really cool because you don't get a lot of that like in the modern games.
Like, that's what's nice about these games too, is like seeing a lot more wacky character interactions that you would never see in a traditional game.
Especially the Mario and Luigi writing like that.
Yeah.
That stuff gets meta at points, and it's ridiculous. But that's kind of why I love it at the same time.
These two remakes, which is funny because these are my two favorites, the ones that I played. I very vaguely remember the Superstar Saga one, and I definitely remember the Bowser's Inside Story one, but I was like, I've already played Bowser's Inside Story, so I don't feel like playing it right this second.
Okay. So, I have very distinct opinions on both remakes. One is very positive, and one is overwhelmingly negative. Do you want to guess which is which?
I'm assuming the negative is going to be Bowser's Inside Story, and the positive is going to be the original.
Yes. Okay. This is one of my theories about remakes, is like, there are certain games out there that need remakes more than others.
Agreed.
But for some reason, the games that always get remakes are never the ones that need them.
100% agree.
What makes this interesting is this is kind of both of those cases. Because the original Superstar Saga, well, I don't think it's aged at all, and I think it's still a phenomenal game, the original one. It did fall behind mechanically a bit,
right,
considering the series evolution. The Superstar Saga remake, I think it's called like Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga plus Bowser's Minions, which I'll get into that bonus thing at the end. The game itself, it's exactly like you remember, but just better in like every way. Like they, aside from a few minor things where they kind of changed out original characters for no reason. You remember in a Superstar Saga when you get to the I guess you can call it the Toad Town of that game, and there's the point where Luigi gets traumatized to the point where he can't do anything.
Classic Luigi fashion, unfortunately.
That's actually a really dark scene now that I think about it. In the original game, it was like this weird like Kamek like wizard doctor thing in a house that helps Luigi out. But in the remake, they just kind of replaced, they were kind of lazy, and rather than remake that character's design, they used the Toad Doctor from Bowser's Inside Story instead. And I wasn't upset because yeah, it's the same thing. It's a one-off character that doesn't mean anything. And I also was kind of like, that's just lazy.
Yeah.
It is what it is. It's such a minor part of the game. And then there's a few other moments, like a lot of people were very upset that Gino got removed, even though Gino's cameo was very...
Everybody loves Gino. You can't talk badly about Gino. You can't even say Mallow is a better character, because if you do, everyone will hate you, but I like Mallow better, sorry.
Because I didn't grow up with it, I have like no like nostalgia for Mario RPG, so I like all the characters in that game fine enough.
Yeah, I agree. I usually don't pick favorite characters and things like that.
I don't really get the Geno obsession. I mean, he does have that one move that can just like kill anything instantly, that also doesn't work on bosses, but that's beside the point. Yeah, they removed his little cameo in there, and I don't really know why, because that remake came out exactly at the same time where the Geno like Smash Brothers costumes came out, so it's like there wasn't really, I can't have been like an issue, but you'll never really know. Aside from that, though, everything is exactly what you would remember. They really upped the cinematics because of how the 3DS's like engine works.
So are these games built on the same engine as like Dream Team and...
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, it's the Dream Team engine, so it's that graphical style. But it's literally everything that you remembered about like Superstar Saga, just in the new graphics with the updated mechanics. So all the combat now has all the additional like refinement. What's interesting is they actually kept the special, like, the bros moves from the original game, so you actually had to relearn, like, all of those combos and stuff again, which was kind of cool. And it was interesting bringing back the hand moves, because those have been gone they only appeared in Superstar Saga.
It sounds like kind of like the recent like Tony Hawk remaster, where it's like almost a 1-to-1 remake, but then they've just added features that make it modern kind of, and like you said, just taking the best parts of the newer games and putting it into the old style.
It's the same game, just better. Admittedly, it's a lot easier now with all the added features, but not too easy. It's actually, I think it's a better balanced game overall now.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, it definitely makes me want to pick it up, because at this point it's probably easier to get a hold of than the original. So
then you can just pop it into the 3DS and not have to dig out a Game Boy or Game Boy Play or whatever. Yeah, it's definitely the definitive way to probably play the game now. My only real disappointment is the music. I thought could have been better. They updated it, the 3DS's sound capabilities, but it doesn't feel like it was recomposed.
Underproduced, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was kind of more like they just kind of slapped some like paint on it and made it look nicer. Final Fantasy IV the PSP remake. It's Final Fantasy IV just with hand drawn like nicer graphics and stuff. That game offers two soundtracks. There's the arranged one, which is like kind of like what I think of like the soundtrack in this game, and then you could also just use the original Super Nintendo music.
That's nice.
So I kind of wish they did that and just like let you use the Game Boy Advance music at that point, because at that point it's not that much better in my opinion. I want to make a quick mention of the Bowser Jr.'s or Bowser's Minions. That is like the most pointless thing ever. I played like 10 minutes of them. I was just like, nah, I'm good.
Is it an actual second game that you can boot up, or is it just within the game itself?
When you get to the title screen, you can pick either the main game and then it's a separate thing. It's supposed to be like a side story that happened during the events of the game. It's kind of like what Bowser's Minions were doing while he was going through his like midlife crisis during the game. I don't even know how to explain it. It's kind of like battles, but they kind of like play themselves in a way. It felt like I was just kind of watching a visual novel and things sometimes happened. I didn't finish it. I kind of just, I played 10 minutes. I was like, nah, I'm all set.
Yeah, at least they put something extra in there in case you were mad for some reason that it was just the old game.
Anyways, now getting on to Mario and Luigi, Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey, I think it's called.
Yeah, it's Bowser Jr.'s Journey. You're right.
God, where do I begin with this one? So for starters, this was like probably one of the most unnecessary remakes of all time.
So what's crazy is I'm looking at the dates and it was like almost 10 years later, which is wild to think about. But realistically, from upgrading from DS to 3DS, I mean...
Another thing that people have pointed out too is the 3DS is backwards compatible with the DS. So Superstar Saga, being a GBA game, is not the most accessible game to find anymore, unfortunately.
True.
Like, I think the easiest way to find it before the remake was it was on the Wii U's Virtual Console, I think.
I'm sure it was at one point.
It's weird that it took... Honestly, it's kind of shocking that it's 10 years after the original, because it doesn't feel that old to me.
I agree. Yeah, 2009 to 2018 or 2019, because it says, yeah, it was released in 2019, so like 10 years. That's insane, right?
Yeah, I just got older there for a moment. Here's a fun thing I did not know about the Bowser's Inside Story remake at first. I had my 2DS by that point, so I wasn't even aware of this. There's like no actual like 3D effects in Bowser's Inside Story.
Well, it's a pretty late release 3DS game, right? Like,
yes.
When did they stop making them? Like, that must have been very late.
I believe that is actually the game that made Nintendo just give up on the 3DS.
Okay, that makes sense.
That game sold horrendously, from what I remember. The Superstar remakes sold okay. When you actually look at the sales numbers, the Mario and Luigi series was in kind of like a progressive downward like trend of sale. Yeah, because Dream Team didn't sell as well as Bowser's Inside Story, and Paper Jam definitely didn't sell as well as Dream Team. The Superstar Saga remake kind of had a bump because of the nostalgia factor. The Bowser's Inside Story remake was like so late. I think my whole thing was like, who asked for it? That was kind of the real question.
Yeah, I wonder, again, because it was so late and Switch stuff was already like happening, I wonder if it was just like, okay, we're gonna give some money, please just give us some Mario title, or like, you know, give us something Mario and Luigi related for this amount of money, and that's what they decided to do. You know what I mean? Like, I have no idea, but
well, it's kind of funny. When I first heard that they were remaking it, I kind of was like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. Like, it's the second most popular, well, arguably the second most popular. It's kind of debatable which is more popular, but it's like, it's one of the most popular games in the series. That makes sense. They remade the other one. But then I actually sat down and thought about it. I'm like, why? Like, there's no reason to remake this game. It's perfect as it is. Here's something, too, about the Bowser's Inside Story remake that is baffling to me. This game has performance issues.
Really?
The frame rate is worse than the DS game. I believe the original game was 60 frames per second, and I believe this one's only 30.
I wonder then if it's like it was like a timing issue, like rushed out, you know, didn't have enough time to optimize everything.
I'm wondering too, because it was so late in the 3DS's lifespan. Apparently, Nintendo had other plans for the 3DS beyond when they finally just kind of discontinued it, and the overwhelmingly like poor sales for the remake, I think, just
it's like I even remember when Switch was announced, they specifically said, you know, we're going to continue to make 3DS games as long as we have the support for it, and everyone was like, whoa, that's interesting.
Actually, it's kind of funny because everyone was like really surprised by that, and I was sitting there going, Nintendo says this about every time they release a new thing.
Yeah, that's kind of true.
When the DS first came out, Nintendo was all like, no, don't worry, the GBA is going to be a third pillar of handheld, because I mean, there's no way it was not supposed to be a successor to the Game Boy, because it had the GBA slot built into it. I mean, it was like, I don't know. Nintendo's really weird, like with how they handle
They're
things.
very careful, and that's the thing. I think they're very careful to not upset their fans, number one, because they do have crazy fans. And number two, they're just very cautious with their new hardware. They don't believe in it until they actually see the numbers, which I think is smart.
It is smart. Although to be fair, they handhelds are weird because Nintendo has always just the race
Yeah,
is
I
like so
agree.
one sided. It's not even funny. I always want to do like a topic on this some point, like the PSP versus the DS.
I think, yeah, that would be a good episode for sure.
My only problem with that is Alex doesn't really have a lot of like knowledge about the PSP. One of the things that I, not to get too off topic, but one of the things that always like annoyed me was when people called the PSP a failure. The PSP is not a failure by any means. When you actually look at sales wise, like this actually shocked me. The PSP sold more than the 3DS.
I even remember, like, I wanted a PSP because I had a DS and everyone else had a PSP. And they were like, oh, we could watch movies on our PSP. We can go on the internet on our PSP and do a web browser. And I was like, oh, man.
I forgot about it. It's like, oh, and it plays music and does everything. And it's like, I remember too, because all the critics said the PSP was going to run away with it. And then, of course, as always, Nintendo just pulls through.
They appeal to the masses, though. That's the thing.
And they just have that they have that market locked down. There's no beating Nintendo there. It always annoyed me when like they would refer to like the PSP as a massive failure, and I guarantee the only reason they do is because of what it actually was competing against, not how it actually did itself.
I agree. And even, again, super off topic, but like the Vita is a really, really good handheld.
The Vita is probably the greatest handheld ever made, in my opinion. The Vita had so much going for it, and Sony just dragged their feet and did not do anything they needed to.
I mean, even the, like, people don't realize it, but there's so many PS4 games that you can literally then stream to your Vita and play in bed or whatever. It's so fun to do that. There's a lot of games with it too.
Oh yeah. The biggest problem with that remake too is that it literally does not add anything new and it runs worse.
Because, like you said, so Superstar Saga, they had so many improvements that they were able to implement new combat abilities and things like that. But yeah,
Most of those ideas were introduced in Bowser's Inside Story.
that's pretty much just a straight remake into the new engine then.
Pretty much. It was about as like, I'm trying to think of a good like example. Okay, it's basically the from what it looks like anyways, it's basically what the Diamond and Pearl remakes are looking like they're going to be. It looks like it's just going to be like legit the same game over again, just looking debatably better. I don't even think I finished the Bowser's Inside Story remake. I think I got up to the final dungeon and then I got sidetracked by something and I just never picked it back up.
What can you do? You enjoyed the first one a lot. You realized the second one, the remake, was not for you.
It was kind of a bummer just because it was like, yeah, granted, I think I'd probably feel the same way if they like remade like another game that I absolutely adore and they just kind of half-assed it. It is what it is. And unfortunately too, because that game like failed to sell, it actually bankrupted Alpha Dream.
Yeah, let's touch on that quick too. So I would love to see a new entry into the series, but with the huge decline, I mean, for the most part, the first few games in the series were the most loved, and then kind of over time, the series started spiraling out of control. So I'm just wondering what the chances of even getting a new entry into the series, and if so, who would be developing it?
The chances to me right now, they're definitely higher than say getting a new
Yeah.
like F-Zero game. I'd say they're probably in that like, I'm trying to think of like a Nintendo franchise that like hasn't had a game in forever but could have a game.
For me, again, this isn't main Nintendo, but I'm always gunning for a Golden Sun, either remake or brand new game. And I'm kind of in the same boat where I'm like, I don't think it is ever going to happen because the DS one did so much worse than the originals.
Which is sad because that's actually a really good game. That's true.
Nintendo remembers things like that. Like I said earlier, Nintendo's smart. They base everything based off sales and things like that. So when they look at Mario and Luigi on paper, they're like, okay, that was a good series, but we did the remakes already, so we're not going to do that again. And the last few entries in the series were not that great. So
Yeah, I think that honestly, yeah, that's
I feel like the only hope that we have is some kind of random fan outcry, because they do listen to stuff like that occasionally where the fans will get super into a series and be like, we want this back.
To be perfectly fair, though, the F-Zero fans have been screaming at them for years now, and Nintendo just doesn't care.
Bring Earthbound back. Give us a new Mother entry. We're not going to talk about that now.
No, I'm not going to dwell on this one. Okay. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but I love Earthbound, but its fan base infuriates me. And there'll never be a new Earthbound because the creator literally just does not want to make another one.
Let's say, like, hypothetically now, if we wanted a developer to develop this game, let's say two things maybe of like, what developer do we think could potentially do it, and maybe like what's our best case scenario of like dream collaboration that would probably never happen that we would want to develop this game.
That's actually an interesting thought, because what made the game so much like so special compared to like Paper Mario was just their distinct like writing style and tone. The biggest problem I see is that like you can emulate the gameplay, but you're never going to emulate that same writing style without the original writers.
So I feel like for you then that your ideal would be like, okay, so some of Alpha Dream's original writers, basically.
Honestly, I'm curious where they actually ended up. I'm sure they're somewhere in the industry. I'm kind of curious where the director went, because he's kind of like the driving force behind these games. I'm trying to think now of like who I'd actually like to see give it a shot. Interestingly enough, I'm thinking of like developers Nintendo has like on hand. I wouldn't want Intelligent Systems to do it, just because they're already struggling enough as it is with their own series.
Gotta be somebody that does good stories in games.
That's kind of why I'm hesitant towards like say Intelligent Systems, just because they write phenomenal stuff when they're allowed to write what they want to write. Fire Emblem Awakening is one of my favorite games of all time.
I feel like they would be kind of one of the go-tos in my opinion, at realistic ones.
Well, that's one of Nintendo's like OG studios. Well, because that was originally just their like technical department back in the day, and they just kind of made stuff, and then they made Fire Emblem one day, and then the rest was history after that. They still have a relationship with Camelot, and I'd be interested on a Camelot take on the series, to be honest.
I think that could be the best of both worlds for me as well, where, like I just said, Golden Sun is one of my favorites. The humor probably wouldn't be there. That's the only thing.
Golden Sun is a very different tone. Then again, they also do the Mario. Actually, getting on Mario RPGs, they did make one of the most obscure Mario RPGs of all time in the Mario tennis games.
What was the story like in that one, though? I'm sure it wasn't memorable.
I don't remember. I just remember I was playing a tennis RPG and it was fun.
Was that Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance?
Both the Game Boy Color and Advance tennis and golf games were RPGs for some reason. Well, I mean, it does make sense, because Camelot was originally Sonic Software Planning, and they made the Shining series for Sega originally. They made Beyond the Beyond on the PlayStation. That was the other big game.
So I'm thinking for mine, who's the developer that made like Xenoblade Chronicles?
Oh, Monolith.
That could be interesting, right?
Oh yeah, Nintendo owns them too.
Yeah, that's why it jumped out to me, because I'm like, what developers do they have that actually make like RPGs these days?
I like Xenoblade, but Xenoblade is a lot of RPG.
Agreed. It would definitely be a different tone as well.
Yeah.
I don't think you could replicate it unless you took the developers of Monolith and writers from, whatever other franchise.
Well, here's an interesting thing too, is Monolith also made, if you want to get into licensed games that are surprisingly really good, Monolith made that Dragon Ball Z RPG on the DS.
I have that. That's a good game, yeah.
Hard as hell, but it's really good. I wish they went beyond the Saiyan Saga there, but...
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, so they could do, actually, that game has a really good tone. Actually, I'm starting to actually put the pieces together here now.
Nintendo, feel free to steal this idea. Don't worry about it. You don't have to give us anything for it. Just maybe our names in the credits. It's all good. It's all good, Nintendo. Don't worry about it. And then I think like my fun like 2 stretch ones, which would never happen, but I would love to see like Square Enix, I don't know.
Square Enix is so confusing, because
they're like a conglomerate now. Like they're not even, you know what I mean? Like they have so many sub developers. I mean, they're just a publisher now, right? So it's weird.
Well, they're a publisher, but they still make games, because they still develop Final Fantasies in-house. What I always laugh about Square Enix is everyone blames Enix for the decline. Meanwhile, the Enix games are the ones that are always doing well. Because Dragon Quest never went into decline, Star Ocean never went into decline. It was just Final Fantasy stuff. But I don't even know if Square even remembers how to make a Mario RPG now that I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, by this time, obviously the teams are completely different. And then my other like fun, maybe on the writer side would be like some of the old Rare writers and stuff.
Oh, so like the guys over at, I guess, Platonics where they're at now?
Yeah, some of them are still there. Again, or take one of those writers from like Banjo Kazooie or something and just like throw them on it. That would be cool.
I'm trying to now that you brought up like an outlandish idea, like possible. I'm trying to think of one. I'm trying to picture what an Atlus developed one would look like.
Ooh. Well, Atlus is weird too because they're mostly a publisher, right? But there are a lot of really good Japanese developers that we only ever see as Atlus.
Here's the thing about Atlus. Whenever you see that Atlus publishing logo on it, in the US anyways, that's not actually Atlus, that's Atlus USA.
Yeah, that's
which
true.
is
I forgot
another
about that.
company entirely. Because Atlus does develop the majority of... They develop their games, but they also localize a lot of other games, particularly like Chunsoft games and stuff like that.
But I bet like their localization team's got a sense of humor. They've done some interesting games over the years.
They do, which is ironic because their first localization is one of the worst localizations of all time in the first Persona. They've picked it up because they actually they've been localizing all the Yakuza games lately.
Oh, really?
Because Sega owns them now, so they might as well use that localization department. That's another outlandish one that would be really cool. The Yakuza studio.
Oh, that could be interesting.
It shocks me that one of the best RPGs I've played this year is Yakuza Like a Dragon.
Maybe you're onto something. Talk about games with crazy story, and then they can also make RPGs.
I'd be interested. I'm actually trying to picture... I'm picturing Mario and the Mafia now, though, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, there's like a secret character that's Yakuza Mario. That's never going to happen, but it would be funny.
Oh, man.
Okay, another random thing. You know, like the Mario Hoops 3v3, where there's just like random Final Fantasy characters in it?
Oh, yeah, because Square made that. I forgot about that.
I just wanted to thank you for coming on today and joining the Gaming with Passion podcast. We recorded for about 2 hours or so it was a really good conversation. And I want to hear from everybody in the comments on whether they think what game developer would they want to develop a new Mario and Luigi game, and how likely do they think it would actually be that we would get a remake or even a brand new entry into the series.
Well, and it was thanks for having me on, man.